Dustin Baker on VikesNow, the Thursday, May 19th edition. We're going to chat about what the body politic, NFL fans, NFL media, the world is suddenly embracing a pivot about the 2022 Vikings. And this is just kind of like the power rankings disclaimer that I give. Like, all this matters is the temperature on the Vikings, what people think, a court of public opinion. That's what this chat is about. It's just like, power rankings. They don't matter. All they do is adjudicate what people think. And over the last 2 weeks, it must be the steam of the NFL draft in the rear view. Out of nowhere, commendable things are being said about the Vikings. So I want to document those on May 19th for you, for me, so we could see if they come to fruition when we're chilling in December. We can be like, do you remember when Jason LaCanfora said this? And we can look back at their track records and use them going forward. So I've talked on this very show about 3 times how in the post-draft aftermath, CBS Sports, NBC, Bleacher Report, Sporting News, all put the Vikings right in the 20th or 23rd best, right in those 4 spots as to, in the pecking order, how good the Vikings are. All told, they were about the 11th or 12th worst team in football per people's eye tests, and their post-draft vibes about the Vikings. Not going far. They got Cousins at quarterback, damn it. They're going to be mediocre. They have to be, right? So that's where it was at, and arguably still is if you pull up any power rankings from various media outlets. However, there is a shift from notable folks, and I did a whole episode on it earlier this week on the Power Index. So I'm going to go through these quietly. About 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, ESPN, Kevin Seifert, who now covers the Vikings after the great Courtney Cronin went to cover her Bears in Chicago, he casually slipped in an article that he expected the Vikings to make the postseason. It was kind of cool. They're getting a little bit of mention, a little bit of tread and credibility among the masses. And that was the first of its kind. Then, last week, the same guy, Kevin Seifert, or Seifert, I'm not sure how you say the last name, my apologies, his bold prediction in an article about bold predictions was that this team is going to the playoffs. Almost like a Jim Fossil moment. So the ESPN documented their guy who covers the team, sees the writing on the wall, has seen the light, that maybe this isn't just a shitty 11th best team in the world. Maybe they're on to something. That was the first one. And then the ESPN FPI index that we talked about, that's numbers-driven, strength of schedule, who's on the roster. They do 10,000 simulations, and bada bing, Vikings were 13th best out of all 32 teams. They were no longer relegated to 22. They were at 13 per what the numbers say and predict. So ESPN's got it all in one bunker there. Their beat guy says Vikings going to the playoffs. ESPN FBI says the numbers indicate the Vikings will be the 6th seed in the playoffs. And this is all a semi-drastic change of pace for where we were at right after the draft. You look down at the roster, you say, same old shit, different coach, 11th worst in the league. It's gradually getting more boisterous that perhaps this isn't just a run-of-the-mill football team. Maybe there's something there, and I'll get into why perhaps they feel that way. Some of the other ones I have documented here. Bleacher Report, they ranked all the offenses in the NFL about a week and a half ago. They said Minnesota had the 13th best offense, which at the time it was like, a little recognition there. They see the weapons. They realize that Kirk can be dynamic when he has time to throw. So Bleacher Report hopped on, and Dan Orlovsky, he tweeted yesterday. He's been high on the Vikings for a couple months. He called them a sleeper. That was before the draft. He tweeted that, I think it was March 31st. And then he followed up with a tweet that documented how close the Vikings were to being good last year if it wasn't the undoings of defensive collapses in the last 2 or 4 minutes of games. So many close games. Boom, they have a new coach. He kind of implied that the new coach doesn't have much to tweak, so maybe he'll fix it. Orlovsky, also an ESPN representative, former quarterback of the Lions, who ran out of the end zone, spooked Jared Allen in 2008. He says the Vikings are going to the playoffs. And then last on some of these noteworthy changes of opinion, Cynthia Freeland, who is a notable Packer fan and NFL.com analyst, ran through the offenses in the NFL, and she claims that the Vikings are the 10th best offense in the league. So all of these little pieces in the orbit, this wasn't happening a month ago or 2 months ago. It was all, oh yeah, they got Cousins back. They ain't going to do shit. And now some heads are being turned that perhaps these guys aren't that bad off after all. So you had two Seifert mentions from ESPN, Orlovsky tweeting this team's going to the playoffs, the ESPN FBI Power Index that puts the Vikings at 13th best in the league. I think FootballOutsiders.com is about to drop one too, and I believe that will be from a tweet that one of their analysts had, that the Vikings will be even higher than what ESPN had, so above 13. And then Cynthia Freeland, who would have no good reason to brag about the Vikings because she enjoys the Packers, says, hey, you got a top 10 offense on your hand. So that's 5 or 6 separate sources, folks, saying, yeah, you don't want to sleep on these guys. And up to this point, the Vikings have been slept on. So here's why I think they're getting there. That's probably the important part of this chat. I always like to have substantiation for the shit that I say for you guys. So I think, foremost, that average Joes and Jane Does are warming up to the fact that Kirk Cousins is still the quarterback and he has weaponry. In Washington, he always had some hodgepodge of Pierre Garçon and injured Deshaun Watson, and then his running backs were putrid. But he did have an offensive line there, so he was able to tabulate those 4,000 passing yard seasons with back then about 25 touchdowns. But now the idea is, in theory, this offensive-minded coach can foster an offensive line that doesn't suck. And then you also have Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Irv Smith, Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison, KJ Osborne, Samir Smith-Marset, all of them there at his disposal. So I think the sticker shock of the Vikings re-upping with Cousins pissed people off. I know it pissed some of you off. And for the masses, it was like, haha, they're going back with Cousins. They ain't going to do anything. They'll be 8-9. Now people are starting to look at it a little bit differently to say, well, God, look what Stafford did out there with those weapons. Kirk and Stafford, I will say it till I die, are not worlds apart. They're actually very similar, especially statistically and in terms of what they do. And never forget that Stafford wasn't a winner until he became one with a team that surrounded him with these Hollywood squares like Jalen Ramsey, Von Miller, Aaron Donald, Cooper Kupp, Odell Beckham, the boys. So I believe that the world is warming up to Kirk as the QB1. It took him 2 months, but now they're like, yeah, well, we could have said the same thing about Stafford last year. Next, on perhaps why folks are warming up to the Vikings being a playoff team or fringe 7th seed or 6th seed, is I think they realized that the draft was good. I was very stunned when they traded with the Lions and followed up the next night, blowing your socks off, trading with the Packers too. I was stunned. But like you'll find as you get to know me over these upcoming years, I don't go like, oh, screw this, I can't believe they did that. I try to keep an open mind and be objective about why did he do that, or how did they get to this point, or maybe this guy doesn't suck, maybe this guy is overrated. And so I think when the fuss, the hubbub calmed down about Kwesi's trading with the division rivals, I think you looked at the spoils of the draft and says, well, damn it, they got Lewis Seen, Andrew Booth, Ed Ingram, and Brian Asamoah as a direct result from those trades, and that ain't bad. In theory, all of those guys could start, at least based on our honeymoon infallibility of rookies at this point in May, but people like the guys they ended up having, and you couldn't experience that or feel it in your bones right away after the draft because you were so fixated on the other teams getting wide receivers that we enabled. So when everything kind of died down about, I can't believe Kwesi did this, you got to watch the documentary the Vikings put out, the mini one, and they talked about why he did what he did, and I think that brought some people to the table. It's like, now I get it. So all in all, I think that cooler heads have prevailed on Kwesi's wheeling and dealing, and they realized that the fruits of his labor, those defenders and Ed Ingram that I mentioned, not that bad after all. Maybe this guy's onto something. Do you really want to doubt the economics guy? I don't know. Also, a couple more rounding out the chat. The depth chart is there for the Vikings. I complained on this very telecast that it was top-heavy, and to an extent it still is. However, they used the draft to get better on defense down the line. Safety, cornerback, linebacker. That's where they needed to get deeper. And I'll be damned, they did it. So when you're staring at the roster 2 months ago like we did on the show, thinking, what do we do if something happens to Patrick Peterson? Well, it's not as nasty now because you have Andrew Booth, who in theory should play sooner than later. Same thing goes for Lewis Cine and Cameron Bynum. I thought Bynum was going to start at safety, but nope, the plan all along was to probably get Kyle Hamilton or Lewis Cine, whichever one they felt would maximize their value. And they got Cine. So the areas that I called out, aside from tight end, that one's still skimpy. They have bolstered the depth chart with the draft, and they suddenly don't feel as top-heavy. A case can be made that there is still some top-heaviness, but the depth chart is there. I could rattle these off. I have it ingrained in my brain. The whole depth chart. Cousins, Darisaw, Cleveland, Bradbury or another guy, Ingram, O'Neal, Irv Smith, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, Dalvin Cook, and CJ Ham. That's the offense. Now let's look at the defense. You have Harrison Phillips, Armin Watts, Dalvin Tomlinson. On the edges, Danielle Hunter, Zadarius Smith. Off-ball linebackers, Jordan Hicks, Eric Kendricks. Cornerbacks, Patrick Peterson, Cameron Dantzler, Shannon Sullivan, Andrew Booth. Safeties, Harrison Smith, A. Staple, and Lewis Cine and Cameron Bynum. That depth chart will go places if a guy knows how to coach it and doesn't get vanilla with play calling for some godforsaken reason in the middle of football games. Or, if the offense does just do enough, perhaps they won't have cataclysmic meltdowns in the final 2 minutes of games. So to the spirit of Orlovsky's tweet, you have some whataboutism. What if the Vikings didn't do all that bad shit in 2021? They were one game away from the postseason. Well, if they hire a guy with a good head on his shoulders from the team that just won the Super Bowl, maybe he can bring that voodoo. He can bring that magic to get them back into the postseason, which they haven't been since 2019. So the depth chart is there. Every NFL team is going to experience injuries. So long as for the Vikings, it's not Danielle Hunter, it's not Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson. So long as it's not one of the putting butts in seats type of personalities, the depth chart is there for this team to get to the playoffs. And I think the world recognizes that. Like, are we sleeping on the Vikings? And that's why they're scrambling to redo some of their prognoses. Finally, there's a new pizzazz. Like, this thing was stale. It took me a long time to realize it because I gave Zimmer the benefit of the doubt after a shitty 2020 season. I thought, okay, he's a good coach. He'll rebound. He'll fix the defense. We'll be right back at him in 2021. Nope, it was a complete sequel to 2020. The same bullshit. The defense wasn't good anymore, and the offense could only do so much. And then they had their problems with 3 and outs and, not getting down the field at opportune times, especially when the defense was having a rough afternoon. So I gave Zimmer the benefit of the doubt, but it turns out that was an extra year too long. But now there's a new pizzazz that when you look at the aforementioned depth chart, or you examine the draft class, or you look at Kirk and the weapons and you're getting used to that, there's a new regime of human beings coaching these guys. So at the end of the proverbial day, it's the same players, but it's a different mantra. It's collaborative, it's youth-infused, it's offense first. So I think that with these experts or pundits that are like, God, maybe these Vikings don't suck after all, I think it's because they're realizing there's a newness. It doesn't have to be a complete redux of 2021. You have a first-time head coach who wants to make a big impression coming off the heels of Sean McVay. Can't disappoint him. And maybe, just maybe, there's something there. So you're starting to see driblets of enthusiasm about the 2022 Vikings rather than same old bullshit. I know I've seen this movie before. They're going with Cousins. All they did was fire the coach. They're going to go 8-9 because that's what it was up until about a week and a half ago. And yeah, all in all, it's really a matter of you, the Vikings fan, and then some of these national voices, if you believe that the Vikings really only needed to get over the hump, if this roster was good enough to make noise in the playoffs as it was last year, O'Connell was brought in and Kwesi were brought in to get them over the hump. Now, I know that drives some cynics crazy, that this Vikings team wasn't that good, so why are they running it back? Well, the metrics indicate that they were very close to being good. They were in so many close games, and you have to ask yourself, do I believe in the idea that this team was this close to winning a lot of those games? Because if your answer is yes, all you would need to do is to get a different head coach to tweak the vision, different play calling, situational defense, and that's what they've done with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, Kevin O'Connell. So they've basically doubled down on the stakes. They want to get to the playoffs. They want to win the Super Bowl, but you must examine for the next 3 months and 2.5 weeks. Is it enough to hire a different guy to get the same roster over the hump? Is that what they were waiting for? Or should they have torched the son of a bitch in February and started trading guys away and rebuilding? Because they had the opportunity to do that. I will be back Friday for a 13 to 15 minute episode. I think we went a little over extra here. Hopefully I didn't bore you. But that's all I got. And Skol, baby.